All right, going to be talking about the self-titled Foxing album that came out earlier this year. I just did a video talking about foxing from the Albatross all the way through Draw Down the Moon and sort of my thoughts on those projects and how they've changed over the years. And on this video, I'll be talking specifically about the new album, the self-titled album. Couple things leading into this. The band had just done a reunion tour, or not a reunion tour, but a anniversary tour for the 10-year anniversary of the Albatross, which was their first album. They went on a tour with a co-headlining tour with the Hotelier, who was also another band that was big in the emo revival scene, and performed that album from cover to cover. The band has not been shy over the years talking about how some of the songs they still perform off that album, specifically The Medic and Rory, it's difficult to play those songs because they represent such a different time in the band's career and in the band members' lives. And so performing that album in its entirety was not always enjoyable for them. They talked about how, it was such a different time and place, and, it feels a little bit immature compared to where they're at now, or maybe not, just doesn't reflect the same things that they're trying to express now. And so I think it's important to look at rolling into this new album cycle. The band had just done a little bit of a retrospective, and there's earlier interviews that came out right after Draw Down the Moon where Connor talked about how when they first started out, when they first released the Albatross, they would play basement shows, these really intimate, small venues with just a few people, and people would come up to them and say, "It's so cool that we're seeing you now play this small show because someday you're going to be playing arena shows." And the band would be, so flattered by hearing that. But as their career unfolded, that never came to fruition. And so there's always this internal strife with the band where that they had really hoped to achieve a little bit more success than they've achieved up to this point. And it just didn't happen. It never did, even though they have this really loving fan base and, people are so impressed when they see them play live. The success that they had hoped for from their music has still never happened. And playing that album, I think, kind of brings back and conjures up some of those memories for them. And so the self-titled album really takes a look at the state of the band and the state of following somebody's dreams and kind of how it feels to pursue something when you're not bearing the fruit of your efforts. So there was another interview that Connor did with Brooklyn Vegan sometime in 2023, I believe, where he talks a little bit about the band working on the new album. He talks about them working on the reunion tour or the anniversary tour for the Albatross. Connor specifically talks in that interview about how he wishes that the band could be a little bit heavier, and how the one album that all band members agree on loving is Slipknot's Iowa, and how that's such an important album to them. And he actually alludes in that interview to the fact that he's been experimenting with different screaming styles, trying to expand his ability to use harsher vocals, and how the band had really thought about trying to make a heavier album, which at the time, having just heard Draw Down the Moon as their last release, that seems so far-fetched. It seems so unrealistic for them to make such a change. But when you look at some of the music that Smidley had recently released, which is Connor's side project, there are a little bit more harsh elements in that project, so you could sort of see how they might want to incorporate a little more of that. And especially given that Draw Down the Moon was sort of this last-ditch attempt to reach this wider audience that was not necessarily successful, it makes sense sort of to think that the band would then undergo another change. So the first thing that we hear about this self-titled album, the first release, comes in the form of kind of a silly tongue-in-cheek press conference where the band actually reached out to a bunch of different music publications and news outlets and invited people to have a panel interview with the band members as they released their first single from the record and announced that the new album was coming. They announced that it was going to be self-titled, going to be produced by Eric, the guitarist, and it was going to be released on their own record label. So this is a fully independent affair, and really the first time that the band is taking this much ownership over their creative process. And so the press conference is kind of funny. There's a video of it. Nobody shows up, so the band their manager announces the album, and then the band sits there in silence, and they play the first single off the album called Greyhound, which is similar to the first single that we got from Draw Down the Moon, the song called Speak with the Dead. Similar in that it's another really long, kind of slower song that seems like one that will make more sense in context of the album, and it certainly does. But a very interesting first introduction to this record. The second single that the band released is a song called Hell 99, which comes way out of left field and is much more chaotic. At this point, it is the most chaotic song that Foxing had ever released. It is the one that incorporates the most harsh vocals, noisy guitars, and really is like a total shift change from anything we've heard from the band up to this point. And even more so considering they're just coming off, again, this kind of mainstream sounding Draw Down the Moon. So incredibly exciting at this point to hear the first two singles. And then the band, true to form, has another kind of funny third single where they actually release the single to their Patreons and encourage them to leak it onto YouTube or onto the internet. And so the unofficial third single is a song called Spit, which is probably the most familiar sounding Foxing song out of the first three singles. Greyhound was a little bit more like dreary, almost dream pop-ish, synth-driven song. Hell 99, obviously very chaotic and more punkish, post-hardcore-ish. And then this last single, Spit, is one that sort of sounds like something that would fit on some other Foxing projects that we've heard before. So the other important piece of information here is that at some point between Draw Down the Moon and this new album, I think it was within 2023, the band actually had touring bassist Brett Torrance officially join. So for the first time since the Albatross, the band actually has a new member. So Brett Torrance is now on bass. So they are now officially a four-piece band. The only other piece of press that the band does, or the only other interview that the band does leading up to the release of this record, is with Stereo Gum. And they sort of talk about the themes of the album being about like the idea of acceptance versus giving up, and how a lot of the album is about sort of the band's existence and kind of questioning where they're at. And that's also the first interview where we are given some clues into the direction of this record. So the author of that piece talks about how the record does include a lot more harsh vocals that will be surprising to fans. So the album kicks off with a song called Secret History, which is classic Foxing, starts the album off with an absolute bang, and is like a total left field curveball that there's no way you could have expected what you're hearing on this. Even hearing Hell 99, this introduces the most harsh vocals that we've ever heard on a Foxing album. So the song explodes into this harsh vocal that's coming from Eric Hudson. I was unsure at first if it was Eric or Connor, but when the song's performed live, it's Eric that's singing here. So Eric is doing this throat shredding, kind of, it's most similar to like a black metal scream, but it's a crazy element that's very unexpected and very jarring. And the song then goes back to a quiet point, and then eventually has another explosion at the end where Connor and Eric are sort of duetting with each other with kind of traditional Foxing style vocals mixed with these really harsh vocals. The harsh vocal refrain here is this line that they're saying of "sold the dreams for arms and legs to piss and shit in homes you rent." And then Connor's duetting in like a clean vocal style saying, "Make your mother proud, you've got to sharpen those dead dreams, you're on your own in a secret history." It ends with this sense of like fight, where it's obvious that, you know, the band's expressing this idea of feeling as though you're following your dreams for nothing, feeling as though you've put all this effort into something and you're trying to, you know, make your mom proud. You're trying to stay true to what you believe in, but it's so hard. You know, you're renting some place just to piss and shit in it. It doesn't mean anything. You don't have anything of your own. You know, it's kind of like this sentiment of just like spinning your wheels tirelessly. And it's something that I think many people experience. This is like relatable. Anybody who's, you know, late 20s, early 30s, if you took out student loans, you know, you did what you were supposed to do. You went to college just to then enter into a job market that didn't have a job for you. And then you're in crippling debt. You can't buy a house. You're struggling to get ahead. Like, it really captures that kind of sentiment really well. Although I think this is specifically talking about like the state of the band, it's certainly still applicable to many people in that way. And so they already hit on this really relatable, really um, common idea that I think a lot of people have thought about over the last few years, like the state of the world, the state of capitalism that makes it so difficult to live. So although the sentiment behind this song is relatively bleak and a little pessimistic, it still ends in a hopeful sense. Like it ends with this sort of upbeat, fully charged, almost like, you know, cry to action, like you're on your own in a secret history, but it's, you know, it's motivating. It, like when they end this song, it makes me want to run through a brick wall. Like it's that exciting to hear. It's actually similar. I would say the most comparable thing is like a Def Heaven song, like specifically the song Canary Yellow by Def Heaven. It kind of reminded me of that song, and that's this like really upbeat, although it's screamed and although it's noisy, it still sounds kind of like exhilarating. Really cool intro. I mean, totally unexpected, and already you know you're in for like a really exciting record. The production, I'm not going to talk too much. I'll try not to do it on every single song, but the production is incredible. I mean, Eric Hudson has done an amazing job producing this album and like really capturing the vibe of the album and like the sort of hopelessness, but also the, you know, the kind of fight that's behind the whole thing. I really hope he gets a chance to do more production after this because he's incredibly talented and just does such a good job of really creating the energy here. So from there, we roll into Hell 99, which again was the second single for the album, so one that people have probably had some time to digest up to this point. And this is by far the most like nihilistic foxing song ever. I mean, this is not only very harsh and, you know, has screamed vocals done by Eric. This actually has Eric on lead vocals with Connor just kind of filling in. But this is by far like up to the point of the album release. This was the noisiest foxing song, the one that has them leaning most towards like a post-hardcore or punk territory. And ironically, it's the catchiest foxing song I've ever heard. I mean, this is the poppiest foxing song. It's so unbelievably catchy. It's such an earworm. It gets stuck in your head and like you could just play it over and over again. I've probably listened to this most out of anything on the album. And it's such a funny song, although it's very bleak, again, like Secret History, and it's certainly painting a very hopeless picture that is, again, very relatable to anybody who's, you know, in your 20s, 30s, and is disgusted with the state of the world. Like, this song is probably going to hit home for you. But it's got this really funny tongue-in-cheek sort of humor to it. And it really displays like how good the lyrics are on here and how clever they've become as songwriters. They've just gotten so good with the lyrics at expressing ideas, but also having like a sense of humor behind them, which the band has always had a sense of humor. And I think on this album, being as pessimistic as it is, it needed a little bit of a sense of humor. So they do a brilliant job of incorporating some kind of funny lyrics and funny lines in here. There's some really interesting lines on here, like I told myself there has to be a better quality of suffering. There has to be fatigue worthy of something, but there's nothing. Which, God, I mean, that really speaks to so many people's experience. Like, if you're working some job that you absolutely hate and you're just stuck there and all it does is provide you just enough to never be able to get ahead. Like, it's just enough to afford some apartment where, like they say on Secret History, you know, sold the dreams for arms and legs to piss and shit in homes you rent. You know, you're going to this dead-end job that you fucking hate just to barely scrape by to rent an apartment that costs way too much, you know, and then you're just stuck in this cycle. And I think they're really hitting the nail on the head with something that many people experience, but obviously something that like is also very true for the band. Like, as we know, the band has not been financially, you know, successful or anything like that. So even leading up to this album, they talk about how many of the band members were working construction jobs just to be able to fund this tour. And so, like, this idea of being stuck and being crushed by, like, this capitalist society and the impossible weight of the world at this point, it really is capturing that so well. And, like, the angry, frustrated energy of this song, because this song is pissed the hell off. Where Secret History has a little bit of hope behind it, Hell 99 is just straight up pissed. Like, this is just a release of emotion. And it just really captures this fury that I think a lot of young people have right now. There's another pretty stark line on here where they say that the minutes have deflated in their value next to nothing, which I think is a sentiment that's harrowing to even consider, you know, that how fast time feels like it's going by when you're just living this sort of endless drone of an existence. And then it has an incredible, like, a dreamy outro, which is another masterstroke by Eric in production, but it's such a good ending sentiment to this where they sort of, it's Connor and Eric singing together, and they're saying, "Did you know it was never more than this?" And then Eric's saying, "Oh, I'm fine, oh, I'm fine." And so it's sort of like this ending that just where you have this crazy release of anger, and you know you want to fight so goddamn bad to change everything, only to come back to the sentiment that, like, you can't do shit about this. Like, we're all kind of stuck in this, and you just have no choice but to just kind of be defeated and say, I'm fine, it's fine. And that's how that song kind of ends. And I think it's just a brilliant ending to this sort of emotional outburst, to then have this sort of, well, I'm fine. And that's often how emotions go. You have like a crazy outburst, and then you have, you know, you snap back into reality, and it's like, I accept it or I don't. And this is the first time of many where the band sort of introduces this theme of acceptance versus giving up. Are you accepting it, or are you just giving up? Or are they the same thing? It's hard to say. And so that's a great example of it already early on in the album. So we roll into the next song, which was the unofficial single. The third song on here is Spit. And this is one that the band in an AMA on Reddit had said was one that they were having difficulty trying to figure out, like how the song was going to be fleshed out. And then one of the band members had sort of said that they thought it should be more overtly sexual. And that's when the band kind of figured out the direction to go with the song. So the song's sort of describing this kind of like, I guess, sexual encounter or whatever it might be, a relationship, whatever. Musically, this song is Foxing doing something that's more traditional to what we've heard from them in the past. So again, like, I could just obsess over Eric Hudson's production on every song here, but this is like just such a good example of how Eric has like leveled up the band, where the song is very percussive. It has this really muddy bass line that just drives the whole song forward. And the guitars provide this sort of dissonance in the background. Like, throughout the course of this album, there's very few just guitar-driven or riff-driven songs. The guitars are oftentimes providing this dissonance or providing this sort of backdrop of like chaos to whatever else is going on. A lot of this album feels like it's driven by the percussion and the rhythm section. And like, kudos and incredible respect to John Helwig and Brett Torrance, because they do a fucking awesome job on this album of really like stabilizing the noise and the chaos that surrounds everything else. But this is an amazing song. It's fucking crazy catchy. Even though this is like a cleaner, more traditional Foxing song, and it follows this kind of traditional song structure, it's still like a controlled noise. It still feels like a controlled chaos. Connor actually, at the beginning of the song, he has some vocals where he sounds a little bit like Brandon Boyd of Incubus. And it's just like, it's so catchy, it's so good. And it also provides this sort of reprieve into the album, where we've started off already with this crazy, like, two songs that have a ton of harsh elements, two songs that are both very chaotic, to then go to this song that is describing this sort of sexual encounter, which in and of itself can often act as a reprieve from all this existential weight that you might be having in your life. So these first two songs express this sentiment on either the state of the band or the state of the world, whatever it is, to then have this moment where you're sharing this intimacy with somebody. It actually provides like a release. Connor has lyrics on here that say like, "Tonight you have my soul, all of this surrounding us is a distraction." And so this provides sort of a reprieve in both the heaviness of the album already, but also from some of these themes. And again, like, as a human being, sex, food, gambling, drugs, whatever it might be, all those things, exercise can provide that temporary reprieve from like all this heavy shit that's on your mind. And so the album has already introduced sort of that idea of, you know, releasing some of these emotions in a different way. From Spit, the album then rolls into Greyhound, which was the first single released here, and is an extremely long song. It's like 8 or 9 minutes long. And as I said in the intro here, like, It was a single that seemed as though it would make more sense in context of the album. And not only does it make more sense, but it just is such an emotional punch. It's such a stark contrast to anything else that's happened up to this point. We have three songs that all have certain elements of like energy, where then you have this song called Greyhound, which just feels like it exists in and of itself in like a void of energy. There's again clever lyrics that are funny, but also overtly depressing when you really think about them. There's a lyric on here where Connor says, so I look at my telephone, look at how beautiful my telephone can be, look at how he loves me. So like the first half of the song has these lyrics about like what's wrong with me, what's wrong with us. And then the second half, it's like trying to wake up from this fever dream only to just realize that you still, are kind of defeated. And it's like, there's nothing you could do. Then just like the outro is this repeated refrain where Connor's sort of duetting with himself. It's kind of similar to what they did on Slapstick, where there's like a sample of Connor's vocals that he's singing against this sample. And he's saying, we will get fooled again. And then the outro of the song is him saying, I've been feeling like I ain't got nothing left to give. And so it's this song that like it almost wants to be hopeful, but it's just stuck in the mud. And it perfectly fits into the flow of the album up to this point. The first song has hope. The second song has rage and then defeat. The third song is just a distraction from everything. And Greyhound is like this beyond depressed, just detached state of everything, just kind of life just washing you by. And it's an incredibly depressing song, but also incredibly beautiful and just like such an ambitious song. Like this album already has 4 songs that are completely different in sound, completely different in execution, and all of them are done brilliantly. Like they've already introduced tons of new elements to the album, sounds that we haven't heard them try before, and they're done flawlessly. Incredible start, and those first 4 songs feel sort of spiritually connected, where then the midpoint of the album kind of feels all connected, and then the last few songs kind of feel all connected. So I feel like that's almost that into the next song, which is called Cleaning, are sort of like the end of the first almost chapter of this album. So the next song on here is called Cleaning, and is almost like a palate cleanser and almost like a transition point from one section of the album to the next. And basically the lyrics on here are expressing, it's almost like this depressive state. Connor says, I come home after a week erased. I'm sorry for having left you soak in it. And then basically goes on to say, don't clean yet. Like I want to pick up the broom, but it's too heavy. I want to live, but I'm not ready. And it's just this really depressing, bleak. It sounds like emotional exhaustion, and also like kind of looks at the burden that you're placing on somebody else when you're going through all this. Like maybe the person that maybe your partner, maybe whoever you live with doesn't feel the same way you feel about all this stuff. And you think about the burden that could place on them, that you feel all this shit and that you're so depressed with where you're at. And so it sort of explores that balance, but it's a short song, it's a quick song, and it's a quick sentiment, and then kind of rolls into, again, like that's sort of like a palate cleanser into this next chapter or this next section of the album. So from Cleaning, the album rolls into Barking. Barking is like the song that feels like it would have fit the best on Draw Down the Moon. It has sort of that glammy, almost 80s vibe to it. It's got like a shiny vibe to it. Very bass driven. The band talked about how they didn't totally know what direction to go with this song until Brett laid down the bass line, and then that sort of gave them the blueprint of what they wanted to do with it, give it this kind of poppy, almost 80s vibe. And it definitely has that. And again, like it could have fit well on Draw Down the Moon. It would have been the best song on Draw Down the Moon. Like this is the kind of pop that I want to hear from Foxing, because it still has an identity to it. It doesn't feel like this, like this carbon copy of anything else. It feels distinctly Foxing. The song talks a lot about like aging. Clothes look like cicada shells from someone once young. Connor says, I could feel myself aging. There's a line on here that says, I can hear the clouds yelling back, which makes me think like old man yelling at clouds. So there's this idea of aging, and then there's this sentiment of I heard my friend barking, which I kind of feel like that's sort of referencing like your friend being domesticated, like sort of giving in to just living this mundane version of life almost. Because Connor says, I heard him barking, I could have sworn on his grave. And so I feel like it's looking at almost like seeing people around you just give in to like this mundane version of life. Maybe it's somebody who used to be an artist or used to be in a band and they gave that up to work a regular job, and that signifies like this death. I could have sworn on their grave. And so it's sort of like looking at this idea of trying not to give in to that, and feeling yourself get so much older and kind of understanding like why somebody else would do that, but not being ready to do it yourself. That's at least my read on the song. But even as poppy and as upbeat as this is and as bass driven as this is, so it has like a dancier feel to it, it still has like a malaise to it that most of this album has, where almost everything up to this point is like void of emotion. There's a ton of emotion being expressed and there's a ton of emotional ideas and concepts being expressed, but the band does such a good job of like playing in a way, and Eric does a good job of producing everything in a way, and Connor does a really good job of singing in this way where it's like you're past the point of being able to feel anything. And like Connor does such a good job of using his vocals here. I talked about it on the other video where like Connor does a good job of creating the emotional like idea of a song with his vocals. And so when it calls for him to be like at a breaking point, his vocals sound like they're almost breaking all the time. Where he's at a point where he's, you know, just kind of feels like he's defeated, his vocals feel like this emotionless void, and Barking sort of has that a little bit. And so again, like a really poppy song, an amazingly catchy song, different from anything else on the album. There's almost we're 6 or 7 songs in and every single song sounds completely different, but all of it sounds connected perfectly. So from Barking, we then roll into Kentucky McDonald's, which is the one that it took me the longest to get into or to like fully understand. But the sentiment of this song is like Connor's talking about, they talk about being at this McDonald's, laying outside, hearing these radios, and the melodies of the radios remind him of somebody, and like he desperately wants that person to be near. And then that leads into this like existential breakdown where he starts screaming, and or Eric, whoever's doing the scream vocals, it's another song that incorporates this push-pull of both scream and cleans at the same time. And it ends with the sentiment where Connor says, "I stared at the glow and I realized I'm mediocre and there's nothing worse." It hits on something carnal in all of us, I feel like, where when you're in somewhere like McDonald's and you're in the middle of some place like Kentucky, especially if you're from like a more populated city, how you could then have this like breakdown and be like, what the fuck am I doing? You know, and it just causes you to like basically lose your mind. And that's sort of what this song represents. It's a very interesting song. Like I said, it's incredibly dramatic. Like it took me a little bit to fully get into it because it doesn't have like a great rhythm to it. It's just sort of builds and builds and builds and then explodes. But doesn't do it in the way that like Secret History did on the first song. It does it in a much more like tense kind of way. But again, it makes sense thematically that you're having this breakdown, that it would be this tense, like come out of nowhere, feel kind of uncomfortable. And this song does have a bit of discomfort to it. And I think this song represents kind of like the breaking point in the album, where you have this hope at the beginning, a little bit of fight, then the malaise, and then this song is like what causes everything to change. This is what puts everything else in motion. Nothing happened up to that point. It was just expressing ideas. But from here on, I feel like there's actual action that starts to take place. All right, so at this point, the album rolls into a song called "Looks Like Nothing," which provides like a huge emotional punch, and actually feels like the first time on the album where the band starts to look inward. It really like explores this idea of desire versus design, which is like the initial opening lyric of the song that says, "Is this desire in this design?" There's a really like sad lyric on here that says, "And all I ever wanted it to feel like has departed from my life. The memory of desire feels foreign in my mind, and the good and bad times slipping through my eyes, collected on my thigh. I blend the lows and the highs until they all become one lie." This feels like the point in the album where they start to give in to their surroundings, and they start to give in to this idea of like life sort of dictating itself to you rather than you dictating what you want into life, which is something that I think a lot of people have to eventually accept, is that it's always going to be life on life's terms, and like you could want a lot, but you have to accept things the way that they are to be able to then actually grow from things. And so, like, this does feel like the turning point in the album where this existential crisis that occurred on Kentucky McDonald's gives way to then starting to actually try and look inward to actually grow from all this and actually be able to, like, take a lesson out of all this pain and suffering that the beginning of the album has sort of expressed. So that then rolls into a song called Gratitude. Interesting song. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Heartbeats on Near My God, where it's incorporating a lot of like dancey elements into a song that has a lot of noisy elements as well. This song's interesting on the track list because it's difficult to sort of understand like what emotion they're trying to get across. It's like a little bit of a frustration, but the lyrics on this are talking more about like wanting to kind of restart, like kind of wanting to wake up. There's a lyric on here that says, I want to trick my body and my brain into a new place, into a fugue state. Give me snapping of the brain. Snapping of the brain is like a medical condition when somebody hears loud noises when they're falling asleep or waking up. So it's sort of expressing this idea of like wanting to shed the past and kind of start over, like not wanting to deal with all this shit anymore. There's references to like sleeping and waking up, and you know, obviously the beginning of the album had these references to feeling like being trapped in a dream and sleepwalking through life. And so this is sort of expressing this idea of like really wanting to wake up and start over. This song has a really sort of like an anxious feel to it. It's upbeat, but it's almost got like a weird rhythm to it that kind of keeps you off your toes a little bit. It's very bass driven, and the midpoint has a crazy drum section where John has like an awesome drum breakdown, and then it kicks into a sick bass line, a sick guitar solo. So this song has a lot of cool elements on it. No harsh vocals really on here, but definitely a song that's expressing like this desire to be able to start over and to be able to kind of move forward past all this shit that's happened in the past. So after Gratitude, it rolls into two songs that feel kind of linked in a way, Dead Cat and Dead Internet. Of course, both have the name Dead in them, and the songs blend together where when Dead Cat ends, it blends right into Dead Internet. Dead Cat sounds like kind of like a freaked out carnival song, Connor singing in a weird voice. Dead cat can symbolize like inherent danger. A dead cat in politics means like a violent or jeering criticism. It's a little bit of a kooky song. It's kind of like Cleaning earlier in the album, where it's almost like an interlude or a palate cleanser into a next section of the album. It does feel like Kentucky McDonald's, Looks Like Nothing, and Gratitude are all sort of linked as this sort of awakening. And then the final part of the album, starting right here, comes with this idea of like acceptance, I think. Some lyrics on here: I'd love to live, but I smell death. There's another lyric that says, now that I have some time alone, I'm chewing through my arm down to the bone. Time enough now at last, I know blood in my head is going home. And then it fades into the next song, Dead Internet, which Dead Internet is like by far my favorite song on here. And out of everything on here, out of all the songs that have these harsh vocals, out of all the songs that have more like metal elements, this is the one that I never in a million years could have expected that Foxing would write a song like this. Like, I've seen somebody compare this to Soundgarden. It does have like a Soundgarden vibe to it. It's like a straight up sludge metal song. I mean, this is one of the coolest fucking songs that Foxing has ever written. It's a song that talks a lot about this rapture, which of course means, you know, biblically it's like a judgment day, or the, you know, the end of the world where God judges everything. It feels like the world is ending in this song. Like the guitar parts, it feels like fucking fiery comets falling from the sky. It starts off, the first line says, finally, balance and penance for dreaming of better things. Poor me and poor you. We'd have done kind things with the money. So this sort of acceptance of like, none of the shit that I thought was gonna happen was gonna happen. Like, I had good intentions, but it's not coming to fruition. And like, that's what this song is expressing, is this like finality of things. Like, everything that you wanted, everything that you hoped for, it's not gonna happen. But it's done with like an acceptance, where although this song has some of the most noisy and chaotic elements of any song on here, it does feel like it has clarity that other songs don't. This has the coolest screams on the entire album. Like, these screams are fucking incredible. They're as good as any metal band. I mean, they are fierce, they're clear, they're loud. Like, they have so much anger in them, so much pain in them. I am so impressed with this song. This is the one. When I heard this, I was like, oh my god, this is the fucking album. This is the album right here. Like they really did that shit. Um, this cemented this record for me as like a classic when I heard this song. Just so cool. Such an incredible step forward. Such a curveball. Never in a million years would have expected the band to be able to pull this out of the hat, but they pull it off, and like it's just such a testament. All these ideas that they implement for the first time ever on this album, all these sounds that we hear for the first time ever on this album, and they're done flawlessly. Like it sounds like a band that's been doing this style forever. This is the first time we've ever heard Foxing write anything that's even close to like punk or metal, and they pull it off like without a hitch. So just an amazing song, an amazing moment in the album, and one that kind of kicks off this final stretch of songs and sort of represents this like a cleansing, like the idea on Gratitude of wanting to start over and wanting to, you know, be in this fugue state and disassociate with the past. And then Dead Cat is almost like this acceptance of things that are to come. And then this song is like a final reckoning or a judgment that feels like the band is fully accepting, you know, the way to move forward is to accept life and accept that things aren't going to be the way that you want. Now, what do you do with that information? So then we roll into the last two songs on here that both feel like a perfect way to end the album, where Hall of Frozen Heads is in some ways feels like the logical wrap up of the majority of ideas and themes. And then the final song called Cry Baby is another awesome exclamation point. Hall of Frozen Heads is more post-rocky than anything that I've heard from Foxing almost since like Dealer or the Albatross. It sounds like more that era of Foxing. This song starts off with the lyric, "I've been living like a memory of whose I can't remember." This song does a great job of like it's accepting in many ways, but it's still asking a lot of questions, which I think is a great way to kind of wrap up so much on this album, where like there is no finality to anything. You're never going to get to where you want to get to. You're never going to like reach that final conclusion, both as a band or as a human being. You know, you could be struggling, hating your job, you know, struggling through school, whatever it might be. Once you get that dream job, that's not the end. It doesn't answer all your questions. Like once you become a successful band, that's not the end. That's not going to solve all your problems. It's only going to happen internally. And this song is like that internal exploration. And like it does have a sense of hope that the rest of the album didn't have. And it does have this clear-headedness that the rest of the album doesn't have. And that's why this post-rock backdrop is such a beautiful way to express this point in the album. And Connor sings in this really, you know, heartfelt vocal style that is more familiar to old era Foxing, which perfectly put a bow on like the chaos of this whole album and this kind of like personal journey. But this is such a great way to express a conclusion to all this stuff and being able to recognize that like it's always going to be an internal job to actually fix yourself. Like all the bullshit that's going on outside, you could let it kill you. You could try to fight it. You could choose to ignore it. You could, you know, sleepwalk through it. All of those things are options. Or you can accept it, understand that the work to be done is going to be on your terms. And like that's what this song feels like, is the band accepting all the shit around them and then being able to like finally say, okay, this acceptance is how you work towards the next chapter. You know, this is the way to move forward and to grow. The song does a really good job of expressing like a sense of serenity, but still asking these questions and still understanding that the journey's not over and that the conclusion has not been reached. Just the level of acceptance has been arrived. You've arrived at this level of acceptance. It's a beautiful song and a great way to move into the final chapter of the album. So in a lot of ways, it feels like Hall of Frozen Heads is like the spiritual ending to the album, and then there's this final point of the last song, which is called Cry Baby. Cry Baby is this beautiful ballad to close the album, and Foxing has written a lot of like ballads and love songs throughout their career. This one feels the most real because it looks at this relationship in the context of this chaos and this craziness that's going on the outside, but just like at the end of the day, you can close the door, be with that person that you love, and like that can kind of take you away from everything else. It's such a good way to close the album with this expression of like this love that can make life tolerable. And I think it's beautiful because if you live with somebody, that's how you start and end every day. So like you could go through your day and have all this pain and trouble at work. You could be, frustrated the entire day, but you could also make the decision when you close the door to your home to like leave that shit on the outside and enjoy that person that you're with. And I think this song actually represents that in like such a beautiful way. There's a lyric on here that says, I shut it down and lock it up, which I feel like alludes to like just putting aside all the bullshit and actually enjoying the moment that you're in with that person. One of my favorite lines on the song says, if I could, I would live my life twice. In the next, spend each second at your side. Drain our days dancing every inch of the house until we've all but worn our shoes and hardwood out. That's one of my favorite Connor Murphy lyrics ever. It's simple, but it's unbelievably beautiful, and it's like such a great sentiment to close out the album of like, yeah, I would live my life all over again if I got to be with this person that I love. That's like, what more is there to life? I mean, you could have all this other pain, but if you have that, you have something, and like that's more than a lot of people have. The song ends with this sampled outro of Eric Hudson when the band members were really young, and he's basically saying like, it's him recording the band, and he's saying, it's not where it could be, but we're getting there. And it's such a beautiful sentiment to close the album with. It's such a beautiful way to put a cap on this, is like this journey as a band, all this unrest, all this, all this desire to be something bigger, but then ultimately accepting like the kind of cliched, it's about the journey, not the destination. Like you're never gonna get there. So just enjoy the journey, enjoy the people that you journey with, and that's the way to make life tolerable. So there's an old interview, I referenced it in the last video a few times, that Josh Cole did, who was a former bassist of the band. But he had a quote that I think kind of ties everything together and like is a full circle moment. And I think it's expressed on this last song, Crybaby, with that outro where Eric says, it's not perfect, but we're getting there. Where Josh said, I think if nothing else, this band is a testament to the idea that if you believe in something, you have to push past the lowest point to find your footing. And I think that's the same sentiment that they're expressing right there. Like, that's what this band has always been about. That's what this band has always represented, is this constant push, this constant search for truth that is a never-ending search. And it comes with a lot of pain, and it comes with a lot of bumps along the way, but it's about that constant journey. It's not about that final point. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like this album is Foxing finding their footing. And it's understanding that, yeah, like we might not ever achieve what we thought we were going to achieve, but we still can make incredible music. All right, so that's it. That's my thoughts on this album. I love it. Strongly recommend it. Definitely my favorite Foxing album yet, and definitely my favorite album of 2024. So appreciate it. If you watch this whole video, thanks so much. And yeah, I love you.